All right. Everyone, welcome to CXps, Knowledge Sharing Module number 11. We got the live Q&A here with Blake Godwin and Chandra Storiston. Blake, Chandra, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Two of my favorite people in the world. Glad you guys are here. So I think our last KSM, we were a little more informal, and we just opened up the floor for the crowd for questions. So we do certainly have questions in the mural if anyone wants to jump in there and post any questions or tag any. But aside from that, I'm just going to turn this over to the audience and let you guys start asking some questions. As usual, at about 30 minutes in, we will stop recording and formally end this Q&A, and then we'll be off the record for the last 30 minutes to network, to chat, share our stories and challenges and all the other cool stuff we're working on with CX and EX. So Blake, Chandra, before the questions start coming in, any words or comments from you after the week-long video release?
Sure. I'll start. Chandra probably has some things to add. Chandra and I put together this presentation about a year ago because, her and I and Client Savvy and Visible Value chat about client experience all the time with professional services firms. And it's so interesting how often we hear that client experience lives in marketing. Chandra, wouldn't you agree? It's typically the entry point into any firm is a CMO, a director of marketing. And the reality is the cross-organizational benefits are tremendous to professional services firms. It touches every aspect of the organization: operations, finance, accounting, just marketing, business development, project management. I mean, it kind of expands across the entire organization, making everybody's life easier, safer, and better. So, the whole idea behind this presentation was to make sure that we could quantify and show how other areas of the organization are benefiting, to help marketers specifically, because they seem to be the ones to always come to the forefront of the conversation, give them the ability to come to the table and create buy-in across the rest of the organization.
I'll just add that the same thing with EX. I mean, so many firms have EX living in often HR, and it really is a much greater initiative, that goes way beyond HR and talent management and really ties closely to your to CX. So it's great to see everyone's interest in the topic.
Absolutely. For all of those that are on the call, were there any specific stats or any numbers that were shocking to you all? Not everybody at once.
Hi, Blake, Tom. I've seen the CX gap statistic before and certainly have heard that. Is there anything like an EX gap that you guys have seen?
Chandra?
Thanks, Blake. Absolutely. I haven't found any amazing stats like the one Blake shared on the CX side, but I can say anecdotally from working with tons of organizations for many years on CX and EX, there's a huge gap. So many firms feel like the experience they're delivering their team members is excellent or superior, and most team members typically would rate it less than what they expect. So there's a huge gap, a huge room for improvement there, and firms that are really embracing EX management are absolutely leading the pack when it comes to getting the top talent, retaining the top talent, and growing the top talent.
Yeah, becoming that destination employer. Chandra, I think you and I have talked about this before. What's the average employee net promoter score across all industries? Isn't it 0?
Yeah, you're close to it.
Right. So,
a lot, but yeah.
Yeah. And what's fascinating about that is if you were to talk to most leaders in professional services, they all think that they're somewhat of a destination employer. They have no problem with employee experience, right? They don't have the problem with attrition or anything of that. But if they are even just a little bit above average, or let's say way above average with an employee net promoter score of 20, which is extremely higher than the average, there's still a tremendous amount of risk that sits within that organization from attrition,
Mhm.
right? Revenue flight risk, the cost of replacing, the list kind of goes on and on and on. The burnout, which causes a compounded effect of additional turnover from gaps needing to be filled by additional employees. So, when you think about all those things, I don't know a statistic, Tom, that's there, but I do know with an average employee net promoter score of 0, there's certainly a misconception from leadership to the bottom of the pyramid that they're not delivering the right experience.
Let me follow up on that with another question I had. If you see a big differential between NPS and ENPS, and I'm going to hope that the NPS is higher, what do you coach clients on? What's the disconnect there? If you've got a 75 NPS and a 25 ENPS, what does that tell you about the company?
Mm-hmm. So I'll put a remark in there, Chandra, unless you'd like to go first.
Go ahead.
So from my perspective and really client savvy's perspective, I'll let Chandra speak to this on her own. We hear a lot. And I think one of the questions in here is what comes first, EX or CX, and why? I think a lot of organizations that begin to implement some sort of discipline around employee experience or client experience thinks one needs to come first, when really they need to be happening synonymously. When you turn all your focus towards your clients, yes, there's a benefit to the employees because the employees get yelled at less often. There's less attrition and pressure. Usually there's more profitability on each engagement because of the client experience. And a lot of relationship managers are compensated on that, right? Profitability on each engagement they're associated with. But all too often, there's never really any synonymous efforts on employee experience and client experience. And so I think one thing that I would derive from that is the employees are looking at that and going, wow, you sure are focused on the clients, but hey, I'm over here. Pay attention to me too, please. And please uplift us the same way that you're doing the clients. Chandra, you got anything to add there?
I completely agree. We see that a lot when there's, such high NPS scores and low ENPS scores. It really is that shift of, okay, we're just going to put all that effort on the client side. And team members really start to develop some resentment over time if there's not a corresponding effort on the EX side.
Right. There is one organization that has a high NPS and low ENPS, which is Amazon. But other than that, I don't know another organization that's making that work well for them. Any other numbers or questions out there beside those that are on the board, and then we can begin addressing those. John Doring.
Sorry, I was just gonna say, I think there was a question in the chat from Mitch.
Mitch, you want to jump in and ask your question?
Sure.
All right.
Really just looking from the two of you and sort of that joint EX-CX perspective, what's the real common big pitfall and what recommendations do you think a lot of the clients out there at professional service firms that you folks work with, what are you guiding and recommending them to do in 2021?
Chandra, you can take this first.
Sure, thanks. From the EX perspective, the biggest challenge we see, the biggest pitfall that a lot of clients that we start working with, they're often doing kind of one-off initiatives and there's no cohesive effort. So then when we start working with them, the first thing we like to do is really define how to calculate the ROI of whatever initiative we're going to start with them on the CX and EX side. Because without having a clear understanding of what your ROI goals are and then what ROI you're getting actually on that investment, as you move forward, even if you have some quick wins and some early successes, we often see senior leadership start to get frustrated with the time and investment in those efforts if they're not seeing how it correlates to the bottom line. So that's the biggest pitfall we see, especially up front.
Makes
So
sense.
let me make sure I'm understanding the question. You're asking what is the biggest pitfall for 2021 and what are we recommending firms do, Mitch? Is that what you asked?
Yeah. What are you seeing as the biggest pitfall that organizations are facing, and what are you recommending they do to overcome it?
Sure. So I'm going to give you two answers here unfairly. So one of them, I don't think a lot of initiatives that professional services firms take on are tied to any why, to any outcome. I think it's a check the box type of thing, right? We need to be doing this because everybody else is, right? I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls. The largest pitfall, though, that I see from implementing client experience or employee experience management across all organizations that we've talked to is that they take the time to design, they take the time to execute, but they don't take the time to develop standardization, training, professional development that allows them to rinse and repeat across every engagement that they do. And so, great, Mitch, let's say you're a new client of mine. Raymond comes to Client Savvy. We teach you how to do this great thing with clients, and you go to the strategic client of yours, you develop a great experience for them as a first engagement, and then you come back and you don't follow the standards that you practiced. Well, there's an adverse outcome that comes from that, right? My first interaction with you was designed, was intentional, was exceptional, was different than every other firm that I've worked with, but we haven't taken the time to standardize processes across the organization, utilize professional development. And so now my second engagement with you is different. When I expected something so exceptional, I think that can be a tremendous pitfall, because once a negative outcome happens, what do we typically see professional services firms do? Go back to the way they were doing things before, because everything was fine beforehand. So those are the two largest pitfalls I see. My recommendation right now to all 2021 initiatives is take the opportunity now to do something. I see so many firms focusing inwardly right now, saying COVID's here, we've got all these challenges, and even they weren't client-centric beforehand, now they're less. Now they're focused on their own business. They've turned inwardly, and their clients are still out there with their hands up, full of anxiety. And it's not helping the client experience. And we've all seen the third-party research saying that by 2022, it will be the single most important reason why your clients choose you going forward is the client experience, not the price, not that you're in multiple locations, not that you have a multiple service line. It's going to be about the client experience.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. John, you look like you have a question.
I'm listening.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I was just thinking about that. And so maybe I do have a question. Here's what I think that I've been coming to these meetings and participating in this community for a while with what I used to think was kind of an outlandish idea, but it really isn't anymore. It's very common in the discussion today, and that is that too many firms focus too much on clients and not enough on employees. So you guys have been talking a lot about that, about how those work together and the balance of that, and I still think they're super out of whack in most firms. But one of the things I've been reflecting on this year, working with a couple of different organizations, is that, and kind of also thinking about myself as a 61-year-old baby boomer generation person. See, I think a lot of people who own and run these firms simply don't get this. At a real gut level, instinctive level, we are just really, really hardwired in our DNA with a paradigm that says, take care of the customers, period. Take care of the customers, period, right? It's always worked. We've been successful. And I'm working with a company right now that, sort of based on advice from service providers like us, it kind of launched into what they thought, at least they thought in their mind, was a kind of a comprehensive employee engagement kind of project. And they're all standing around now kind of, I don't know, I think they did it completely wrong. They sort of interpreted it as that you got to sort of, I don't know, kind of I guess the meme would be the foosball table thing, right? Or a whole bunch of kid gloves and cheerleading sessions and things like that. But they're sitting there, I just feel like they just don't get it. And or I don't believe it, right? I'm really skeptical that investing in explicitly in my team is actually going to get me the same kind of reward that I do when I invest in clients. So I don't know. I'm just kind of wrestling with that. How do we change deep-seated beliefs when they're like that? Does that make any sense?
It does. And I think that's what we're all trying to figure out. Right. I mean, there are so many, the numbers that you saw on the slide for the most part, I mean, they're not Chandra and I's, these are third-party research firms that don't benefit from implementing client experience or employee experience strategies. I mean, you look at Zweig's numbers, PSMJ's numbers from 2019, they say there's an average cost of $100K per in a market that has an average 17.9 employee attrition rate. I mean, a 100-person firm irrefutably has a $1.79 million a year bottom line problem. And I mean, that's conservative, right? I mean, if I've got John Doring on my team and John Doring manages $10 million of business a year and decides he wants to leave as a part of that employee attrition, you're a hell of a lot more expensive than $100,000.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so those numbers are there. Those stats are there. The firms that are practicing employee experience and client experience, where they sit in the market, that information is public and is there. So I don't necessarily know how to answer that question because
you know what? I think here's to push back a little bit. Here's part of the problem with that math. When I leave, in your example, the firm doesn't lose the $10 million because somebody steps up. Somebody is a hero. Some young person in this firm, goes out of their way. That we're our own worst enemies because we keep making it work by hook or crook in spite of the system oftentimes. And that trains, I think, the ownership over time to be, to kind of be, I think, blinded by this idea that somehow it'll all work out. And I would agree that we don't count the costs really very well. But for some reason, it's not as catastrophic as it would otherwise seem. But it does lead to, as Chandra said, right, sort of quoting those Gallup numbers, it does lead over time to an entire system where half of us are walking around with their knuckles dragging on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. And half of us want, and what, 17% of us want to actually blow up the building.
Yep.
So it's not a very good system,
every professional,
yeah.
It seems like every professional services firm was somebody who left their old firm and brought clients with them to go start their own firm. I'm not sure there's been a professional services firm started that wasn't somebody leaving because they weren't happy. They didn't think it was being done well. They thought they could do it better, and they bring a book of business with them. I had a client way out on the West Coast who got acquired, and 30 days later, a third of the company walked literally across the street, set up shop, and started competing. That doesn't happen if you've got a compelling and engaged employee experience.
Yes, agreed.
Yeah, I would say, Chandra, you can attest this or not. I mean, we talk to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of professional services a year. And I would say Chandra and I talk to a couple hundred firms a year, and 60-70% of them say when rainmakers leave, they take a whole lot of business with them. And that's one of the biggest things that they're trying to avoid, is transferring that brand loyalty from an individual to the organization, because not everybody carries the same brand flag. And it seems to be a giant problem. So, again, I would believe that the numbers are conservative. Chandra, do you have any thoughts on that?
I completely agree with you. I think they're very conservative in the numbers. I think they're much more impactful when you consider, the amount of time it takes to get to find a new employee, get them up to speed, get them to be fully productive. So I think it really amplifies those numbers significantly.
Sure. One of the questions that I found in here, and I want to hear, Chandra, you answer this one first. And I love this question because I think a lot of people that we're talking to are asking us this question. So how have employee expectations changed since COVID-19?
I think that's a great question. What we've seen over the past 9 or however many months we're into this now, is employees' expectations have dramatically increased. They are increasingly feeling more and more and more vulnerable the longer and longer this drags on, and they're expecting more support from their employers. They're expecting very candid conversations. They're expecting employers to not only deal with the normal stuff you would have to deal with in managing employees, but now you're dealing with there's a lot of expectations of, I need to have this completely flexible schedule to help take care of my kids, my spouse, others in the family, as well as, juggle, schooling or whatever else comes up. So there's the expectations for complete flexibility. There's also the expectations that for more emotional support from employers than I've ever seen in 20 some odd years of doing this, where they're looking for someone to listen to them and really hear what their concerns are, their worries are, and really prioritize them, and that's on top of all the normal things you have to worry about. So they've just dramatically increased, and I don't see that going back to normal anytime. I think there's more and more expectations for that being set now.
So can I ask a follow-up question to that then? What would your recommendation be for anyone whose staff is primarily working remote right now or feeling vulnerable? What are some things that they can do to help them feel less anxious, help them feel more supported? What are your thoughts there?
It's a great question. It really starts with your managers. You've got to get your managers the appropriate training. They have to understand how to really take care of their people. Most managers end up in those roles because they're best at what they were doing technically, not because they're the best people person. They're the best people manager. So you often have the wrong people in the wrong roles. You don't have a clue about how to manage people. So getting those managers, those training, really teaching them to be empathetic, just like you are on the client side, is so vital. So teaching them how to have empathy, how to have patience, how to be comfortable with uncomfortable conversations with their team members is really important as well now.
Yeah, I would also add to that, checking in, measuring how they're doing, right? Checking in a lot more often. One of the additional questions was, how has client expectations changed since COVID 2019? This one I think is really interesting because I'm not sure clients even know what their own expectations are right now, right? The world has changed, their environment, their communication. As I said earlier, a lot of professional service firms are focusing more inwardly than they were before. So there's less contact. And so, I don't know that clients even know what the appropriate expectations are right now. But what I do know is that checking in more often, asking the questions, making sure you're in alignment, measuring against their expectations currently, having deeper conversations with your strategic clients, and easing that sort of curiosity of what's next, I think is the most important thing. And if the world continues on the way that it is, well, then we will eventually have a new set of expectations. But right now, I just think there's a juggling act going on. What should I expect? How often should I be communicating? And I think it's on both sides of the house.
I have a comment, Blake.
Sure.
I think I see too a really big disconnect that's likely to cause significant problems down the road, and it's generational. And I would describe it this way: the young folks in the world today, their attitude is in part, see, I told you we could work remotely and it would work, and this is a lot better, and I don't want to go back to anything else. Maybe we'll make some adjustments, but this is kind of closer to what I was looking for. And then there are people in the baby boomer cohort who are saying, I can't wait till we get back to normal, get back to having everybody in the office. I can get back to my highest value task, which is walking around at 5'10", asking where everybody is. I think that's a clash coming up in a really, really big way. And I see this with clients who, sort of the older partner level people sitting around trying to develop a quote unquote work from home policy. My advice to them has been, if the word policy is in this initiative, then you're on the wrong track already. But I see some head shaking there. Any comment about how do we reconcile that different people are actually experiencing, good and bad in different ways?
Yeah. Just one quick comment on the policy piece. I mean, that sure is a way to show you don't trust your staff, right? This is procedural. This is policy. This is what you must do. It's certainly a way to show that there's some distrust that causes more anxiety and poor employee experience. Chandra, I want to let you touch on his question there, get your insight.
Thanks, Blake. It's critical, because we can't see our team members walking down the hallway at 5'10" anymore. And I do agree that most firms are really going to struggle, and we're already seeing this with bringing everyone back to work all the time. I think those days are pretty much gone. But the really important thing is to understand how you can shift your mindset, your thinking of how do we evaluate performance now? It's no longer about hours. It can't be about hours. Yes, you can be big brotherish with technology and stuff, but that's creepy and not really a good way to see if people are being effective. So how do we start really measuring outcomes? And how are we making sure we're setting expectations with our team members at the beginning of this new year so they know, so they're sure what their goals are, what they have to do, what those outcomes are that they need to achieve, so they can then be rewarded for them. I mean, it really goes back to the importance of having those critical conversations, those tough conversations, very candidly, and saying, like, you can work from anywhere. Our software clients have been doing it forever, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if you're in India, China, or Boston, right? You're just doing what you got to do. And I think it's really important that professional service firms really use this opportunity, this kind of forced work from home, to really evaluate and say, you know what, most of the firms we work with, they've seen significant upticks in productivity, in utilization, in profitability. There are so many cost savings to be had, as well as so many strengths that firms can really build on to distinguish themselves from others in the industry. So really figuring out that performance management piece is critical.
Yeah, and the firms that you were talking about that haven't changed are certainly the traditionalists, right? Put them in the category of traditionalists.
Absolutely. I think Mitch had a question. I see your hand.
It's kind of a question or a comment for your observations. And it goes back to and touches a lot of the things we've already talked about. So, in the next decade, by 2030, the baby boomers are to be exiting, right? So we've got this 10-year window that we're going to be facing before that next generation is fully taking over, and it will really be probably, the millennials that are in charge, so to speak. So when you think about those types of changes, the immediate thing that the recency event of COVID is scaring me about, or that I'm scared about, is the virtualization of our businesses is going to prove to our clients and to our employees that you can work anywhere. You can buy from anywhere. So for me, I'm both scared by that because of the employee standpoint. Our employees we got to do a better job with employee experience because they can go anywhere in the country now and get a job. Because everybody's all waking up and saying, I don't need them to move here.
That's right.
It's not necessary. And as we virtualize the relationships with our customers, they're starting to say, oh yeah, I don't have to buy from somebody locally. I could go find a specialist that works with architects really well that does professional services work for accounting and wealth management.
Right.
And so I think it's going to, I think the CXEX game just got that much bigger from what we've experienced in the last 9 months.
Yeah. Well, to your point, right, it makes it that much easier to leave a firm that isn't delivering a great experience because of the virtualization, because you can get the work done anywhere in the world, because you can go work anywhere in the world and still perform the work and get a client anywhere. So I agree with you. That's a great point.
Hey, Blake, I want to jump in. Sandra, so I work for Full Sail Partners, and we're a virtual company, and I've been working with them over 7 years. And you're talking about performance reviews and doing performance reviews. For me, like, it's real obvious that somebody's not working. Even when you're working from home, it becomes really apparent really fast. So I was wondering how you think that's gonna, like, when you say it's gonna affect performance reviews, in what way do you see it affecting that? Because I'm not a clock watcher. Somebody's got a kid, they go to the doctor, and they're still getting their job done. I'm not worried if they worked 6 hours that day or 10,
Right.
So
Go ahead, Chandra.
I was just gonna say, in so many firms though, your project managers or whomever, they're oftentimes managing way more people than they should be. So it's impossible for them to, understand really how effective a lot of their team members are. And in those firms that have situations like that, where people are, if you're managing more than 5 people, you're, 99%, I'm 99% sure you're not doing it well. Unless you're doing nothing but managing people all day. And that's rarely the instance in professional services. So you have to set those clear expectations up front, and so many firms, when they're doing performance reviews, doing annual reviews, they're not doing them frequently enough. They're not having the hard conversations, and oftentimes they're just kind of, oh yeah, you're doing great, here's your bonus, we'll talk about this next year. And that's not enough. It really becomes more and more imperative that you have those continual check-ins, like Blake mentioned, that you're not just making performance management a once or twice a year conversation.
Yeah, I definitely agree about that. I definitely agree with that performance management once a year annual reviews is very archaic, and continuous feedback is probably the best route, especially in the work from home environment.
Yeah, and I'll change that. Not just continuous feedback, but continuous collaboration. I mean, communication is key. If you're having conversations about what's going on in the field or what you're doing, you know that it's continuing to progress. We don't need to silo ourselves so often. I'll also say that, Full Sail, just like Client Savvy, I mean, we have all the tools, to see if somebody's working. We have our CRMs, we have all the software components that allow us to see what our efforts are. I don't think a lot of professional services do. I mean, there's still a lot of firms that don't have CRMs. And even if they have CRMs, they don't utilize them. They're still working out of Excel sheets and pieces of graph paper, right? And I think for firms to excel and really work in this environment, and to be able to provide trust without actually micromanaging, but being able to see at a micro level, it's time to invest in some tools. Invest in some tools that allow you to see without having to have conversations like, hey, Ryan, what did you do today? Right?
Yeah.
You should be able to see that stuff. And there are a lot of firms that just don't have that stuff in place right now because they weren't expecting anything like this. And they thought that forevermore we'd be in the office together. So there's a lot of investment that has to happen. And I think if it doesn't, those firms are going to suffer.
Yeah, I agree. I think an HCM tool is definitely something firms are going to have to be looking at investing into, so they can really manage their people, provide that continuous feedback through that tool.
John?
Yeah, I'd like a comment building on what Mitch said. I think I totally agree with this threat about sort of fluidity of both staff and clients. They're kind of ability to think about the marketplace really differently. There is, in my view, even a further dystopian step, an even bigger threat, and that is that the customer might see the potential for hiring the individual who's sitting at home on their kitchen table and not the firm. And there is some precedence for this in other markets where there's I would call this not fluidity, but atomization, essentially the blowing up the firm, hiring all of the engineers or architects as individual independent contractors, the kind of Uberization of the business. And my view is that would largely be really, really bad for professionals, because an individual professional doesn't have much negotiating power in the marketplace or with any particular customer. So I think part of the EX story with our staff is be careful. Be careful playing with fire here and what you wish for, because if the world no longer sees the firm but just sees you, that's a serious commoditization risk, I think. And I don't know if anybody thinks I'm wacky about that, but I think that's a really good EX opportunity and a really good sort of strategic messaging thing. You know, my definition of the corporation is explicitly a group of people doing something together that they couldn't do by themselves. And so we have to keep making that case, right? Why are we better because we're united together rather than just a bunch of individual parts? That's to me to be an EX, CX kind of leverage point.
Yeah, you know, I think that's the impact of a lot of root causes, which is, as an example, inconsistent carrying of the brand flag or lack of cross-selling, you know, from your organization. Again, if I only work with John, it's very easy for me to separate from, you know, Corporation ABC. But if I work with Mitch, James, Ron, Ryan, Chandra, well, now I'm working with Corporation ABC, and just because John leaves, you know, I don't really care. I'm getting a consistent experience across all the folks that I work with. And, you know, just empowering your staff and giving them the confidence and giving them the readability as to how other professionals inside of the organization deliver similar experiences to build confidence internally and help grow that cross-selling opportunity. And again, train, standardization, some of those things, I think that takes away that risk. Because it's one thing if, you know, you got an exceptional person, but you don't work with anybody else in the firm. Absolutely. I could just hire you as an independent contractor and you can go start your business. But there's some risk aversion that comes along with solving the root causes that could prevent that impact.
John, that makes me think of one of my favorite travel stories. I was on a plane, 2019, sitting next to this a guy, just making a chit chat, ask him what he does, and goes, "I'm a bookie." And I laugh, and, you know, "No, really, what do you do?" He goes, "I'm a bookie." And this is a, you know, late 50s, very put together gentleman, does not look like any of the stereotypes of a bookie. I mean, not a tattoo in sight, you know, not necessarily the kind of guy who looks like he'd break your bones. And, you know, I'm just curious about this business because I'm not a gambler. I don't really know the world. So I just start peppering him with all these questions because I'm a curious individual. And before long, I've got a client lifetime value calculator up and he's feeding me numbers and we're like analyzing his business. But what really struck me as fascinating is he's got 100 agents that aren't actually employees because he's not legally actually a business. His agents find the clients, make the books, collect the money, pass the money to him. Unlike a corporation where I collect the money and then I go pay my employees. His customers, he has no legal recourse if the customers choose not to pay, because the feds kind of look the other way, he says, as long as you don't get into the bone breaking and the harassing. And yet his customers keep paying. So I'm sitting there, my big question is, what in the world are you doing to make your employees pay you for the privilege to work for you and make your customers lose money and pay you for the privilege of doing business with you? And there's no legal recourse. You know, you got to be doing EX and CX so incredibly well that people are volunteering to do this with you. So that was just a, you know, to your point of the independent contractors, how do we avoid that future world of atomization? I think there's a lesson to be learned that this bookie who's, you know, clearing $119 million a year, he's got people giving him money for the privilege of working with him. That's a really high standard. So
Good story too.
I actually asked him to come speak at CXps. He goes, you know, I can't really speak about this publicly, right? So, hey,
Oh, that's great.
guys, don't go anywhere. We've run long on the recording. Let me stop the recording here. Thank you all for watching. Everyone stick around. We'll reconvene in just a second.